The sanctuary is quiet, the congregation deeply engaged in the sermon, completely unaware that their collective life savings are systematically vanishing. A prominent elder, celebrated for his philanthropic generosity and impeccable moral standing, has just secured another $2.5 million from his peers for a supposedly risk-free real estate venture. There is no real estate. There is only a meticulously engineered illusion, built entirely on the foundation of shared faith. By the time the illusion shatters, leaving a trail of bankruptcies and broken spirits, the perpetrator will have siphoned away decades of hard-earned wealth. This is not an isolated incident of financial mismanagement, but a calculated, devastating crime that targets the very core of human connection. The most effective deceptions do not require sophisticated hacking or brute force. They require a familiar face. When a financial pitch comes from a stranger, human instinct naturally raises a shield of skepticism, prompting questions, demands for documentation, and a healthy dose of doubt. But when that exact same pitch is delivered by a trusted neighbor, a fellow parishioner, or a respected community leader, that defensive shield drops entirely. The critical faculties that normally protect individuals from financial ruin are bypassed by a powerful subconscious assumption that people like us do not steal from people like us. This cognitive blind spot is the fertile ground where some of the most destructive financial crimes take root. Investigating this specific breed of exploitation reveals a highly specialized form of economic crime known as affinity fraud, where scammers target members of identifiable groups such as religious congregations, ethnic minorities, or tight-knit professional associations. The perpetrator weaponizes the existing social bonds and inherent trust within these communities to bypass standard financial scrutiny. Instead of relying on the merits of an investment, the fraudster relies on their membership status. They exploit the shared identity of the group, using common cultural touchstones, shared language, or mutual faith as a cloak of legitimacy, transforming close-knit communities into personal hunting grounds. Often, the underlying mechanism driving these devastating losses is a Ponzi scheme, an investment fraud that pays existing investors with funds collected from new investors. The scheme relies on a constant influx of new capital to survive, generating no actual legitimate profits. In the context of a closed community, this structure is particularly lethal. The first few participants, often influential members of the group, receive their promised, impossibly high returns exactly on schedule. Thrilled by their success, they become unwitting evangelists for the scam, enthusiastically recruiting their friends and family. The fraudster no longer has to pitch the investment because the community does the recruiting for them. The architects behind these operations possess a distinct psychological profile, characterized by acute social intelligence and a profound lack of empathy. They are social chameleons, adept at identifying the power structures and influential figures within a targeted demographic. Many are not outside infiltrators, but long-standing, active members of the community they intend to bleed dry. They sing in the same choirs, attend the same cultural festivals, and donate ostentatiously to the same local charities. This deliberate cultivation of a righteous persona is entirely tactical. By positioning themselves as pillars of the community, they insulate themselves from suspicion and create an environment where questioning their financial proposals feels akin to questioning their moral character. This intense insulation makes these crimes notoriously hard to detect early. Regulatory agencies and financial watchdogs constantly monitor public markets for irregularities, but they have little visibility into private handshake agreements made in church basements or community centers. The closed-loop nature of religious and cultural groups acts as a formidable barrier to external oversight. Furthermore, victims are often actively discouraged from seeking outside counsel. The fraudster will frame the investment as an exclusive opportunity meant only for the chosen few, warning that involving secular lawyers or traditional financial advisors will ruin the deal for everyone. This enforced secrecy buys the scammer the time they need to drain the accounts and hide the assets. When the inevitable collapse begins and the promised returns stop materializing, investigators face a uniquely frustrating landscape. The SEC and local law enforcement frequently encounter a wall of silence, not from the perpetrators, but from the victims themselves. There is a profound, agonizing reluctance to report a fellow community member to secular authorities. Victims often choose to believe the fraudster's desperate excuses, blaming temporary market downturns or administrative errors, rather than confront the horrific reality of their betrayal. This denial is a powerful force, allowing the scammer to operate for months or even years after the initial default, occasionally extracting even more money from victims desperate to save their initial investments. The legacy of such exploitation stretches back decades, adapting seamlessly to the evolving contours of society. In the early 20th century, newly arrived immigrant enclaves were frequently targeted by charismatic figures promising to double their meager savings through mysterious overseas ventures. These early scammers understood that language barriers and a deep-seated distrust of unfamiliar banking institutions made these communities highly vulnerable. They offered a comforting, culturally familiar alternative to the daunting traditional financial system. Today, the core psychological manipulation remains identical, even as the mechanisms have evolved from physical ledgers to complex digital assets and offshore shell companies. The digital age has exponentially expanded the reach and velocity of these operations. Social media platforms now serve as the new town squares and congregation halls, allowing fraudsters to infiltrate virtual communities with unprecedented speed. A scammer can join dozens of private online groups dedicated to specific faiths, hobbies, or ethnic backgrounds, carefully curating a digital footprint that screams authenticity and shared values. Through targeted messaging and the strategic use of community-specific jargon, they can build a network of trust across international borders in a matter of weeks, executing devastating investment scams on a global scale without ever shaking a victim's hand. A critical component in the rapid spread of these digital and physical schemes is the halo effect, a cognitive bias where the perception of one positive trait influences the perception of all other traits. When a religious leader or a deeply respected elder inadvertently endorses a fraudulent scheme, their spiritual authority is subconsciously transferred to the financial proposal. The congregation assumes that a person of such profound moral standing would have thoroughly vetted the investment. The scammer actively exploits this dynamic, prioritizing the recruitment of these key influencers, knowing that securing their participation is the key to unlocking the wallets of the entire community. Consider the devastating impact on a tight-knit immigrant community in the Pacific Northwest, where a charismatic entrepreneur promised guaranteed double-digit returns through a complex network of foreign exchange trading. The promoter spoke the community's native language, understood their cultural obligation to support extended family, and actively played on their shared anxieties about securing a stable financial future in a new country. He issued official-looking promissory notes, dazzling his victims with opaque financial terminology that masked the complete absence of any actual trading. The language barrier served as a protective moat, keeping skeptical English-speaking financial regulators completely unaware of the massive capital drain occurring right under their noses. When the foreign exchange illusion finally evaporated, the resulting devastation extended far beyond depleted bank accounts. The true horror of this crime lies in its dual nature, serving as both a financial catastrophe and a profound psychological trauma. Victims lose their life savings, their retirement funds, and the money set aside for their children's education. But they also lose their community, the shared spaces that once offered comfort and solidarity. The church, the cultural center, the local association suddenly become sites of deep shame, suspicion, and bitter conflict. The fallout invariably fractures the targeted group. Families are torn apart as those who recruited their relatives are blamed for the resulting financial ruin. Bitter divisions emerge between those who want to pursue aggressive legal action and those who still desperately cling to the belief that the fraudster will eventually make them whole. This internal civil war is the scammer's final, cruelest legacy. By weaponizing the very bonds that held the community together, the perpetrator ensures that the group will struggle to heal long after the criminal proceedings have concluded and the prison sentences have been handed down. The persistent success of these operations highlights a glaring vulnerability in how society approaches financial literacy and consumer protection. Traditional educational campaigns often focus on recognizing the mechanical red flags of a scam, such as unregistered securities, guaranteed returns, and high-pressure sales tactics. While vital, this approach entirely misses the emotional and psychological dimensions of the threat. When the person offering the unregistered security is the godparent to your child, or the person promising the guaranteed return is the leader of your prayer group, the mechanical red flags are invisible, obscured by the blinding light of misplaced loyalty. Dismantling this threat requires a fundamental shift in how communities govern their internal financial interactions. It demands the cultivation of a culture where verification is not viewed as an insult, but as a necessary protective standard. The most effective defense against the weaponization of trust is the absolute separation of the messenger from the message. An investment opportunity must be evaluated entirely independently of the person presenting it, regardless of their social standing, their religious authority, or their history of philanthropy within the group. Financial experts advise instituting rigid structural firewalls within community organizations. Religious and cultural groups must establish clear, enforceable policies prohibiting the solicitation of investments during gatherings or on organizational property. Furthermore, leaders must be trained to recognize the signs of financial grooming and actively encourage their members to seek independent, third-party verification from licensed professionals before committing capital to any venture introduced by a fellow member. The phrase, "trust but verify," must become a foundational doctrine, repeated continuously until it overrides the dangerous instinct to blindly follow a familiar face. The fight against this insidious form of deception is an ongoing, evolving battle. As long as human beings seek connection, meaning, and financial security within the embrace of a community, there will be predators waiting to exploit those fundamental desires. The perpetrators will continue to refine their tactics, adapting to new technologies and shifting cultural landscapes, always searching for the next tightly bound group to infiltrate and consume. Ultimately, protecting these vital social structures requires a collective, unwavering vigilance. It requires the courage to ask uncomfortable questions of respected figures, the discipline to demand rigorous documentation in the face of emotional appeals, and the wisdom to recognize that true community leaders will never demand financial blind faith. By understanding the meticulous anatomy of these betrayals, society can begin to harden its defenses, ensuring that the sacred bonds of trust remain a source of strength rather than a devastating vulnerability.